Do Australians really all hate living in an apartment? I came from Asia. I lived in apartments all my life and in all honesty, they weren't too bad. It's really common in Asia. Since coming to Australia, all I hear is apartments suck. Apartments this, apartments that. So cue to you all, do all Aussies hate apartment living? If so, why? Apartment dweller here. Do I hate it? No. Would I trade for a small house cottage in the same area if I could afford the outlay? Absolutely. Besides the additional room and the joy that having my own space would definitely bring, just not having to deal with strata would be a huge quality of life improvement. Apartment living wouldn't be so bad if they weren't built like a leaky showbox and neighbors had some sort of courtesy towards each other, and those around them. It's more the fact that other people have no respect for others. I've lived in units apartments and I try to be considerate of others. I never played loud music etc., but my neighbors never cared and would blare it at 3 a.m. It's just rude people ruining it for others. No, we don't. Growing up here, a lot of us would have had some type of house with a backyard. So there was more space. Apartments here can be tiny but nowhere near as small as some overseas. I don't hate living in an apartment, which I do. I hate the shitty build quality and do nothing strata. The strata commit is okay, but the strata company are a lazy bunch of pricks. I wouldn't say we hate apartments or units, but owning your own house is in our culture, which is probably why most people prefer houses. There is also the fact that we have a big backyard and front yard culture, which also probably contributes. Australian apartments suck. They're often very poorly built. It's mostly because they're often poorly built in Australia. They're just not used to it. Go to China or South Korea and see what actual density living is. It's just basically living in a box in the sky. The only way people would think about it is if it was built properly. Soundproofed. 2 to 3 bedrooms minimum and fees were low. If my apartment was built properly, I'd continue living in it without complaint. However, it is garbage and I cannot wait to get out. I love apartment living and have no desire to go back to a house. Townhouses, duplexes and 2-3-story flat developments with outdoor parking and no lifts are typically the highest density living many Aussies are willing to entertain. I've lived in Asia KL in an apartment in a condo complex and that had an Olympic-size swimming pool, gym, cafe, Indian restaurant it changed a few times, a small shop, a cinema you could rent out and watch movies on etc. If we had apartment complexes like that, I think they would be more popular, but they would also be super expensive. Our apartment was 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, so not small at all. I wouldn't mind apartment living if it were soundproof. I hate hearing neighbors. While I've never lived in a flat to say I definitely hate it, the thought of leaving behind my garden and trees and grass and chooks and turkeys is abhorrent. It is a lot of work, I'm the first to admit, but it's a labor of love. Coming inside after a couple hours of yard work every evening feeling grubby and tired but intensely satisfied is the joy in my day. I would love to live in a good apartment. However, I keep hearing horror stories about questionable developers building huge bad quality apartment blocks just to make a quick dollar. If you're buying an apartment, you can't really get a building inspector to check the quality of the entire building as far as I know. So a house can be a safer bet. But I hate urban sprawl and wish Australia would actually build more good quality apartments. I grew up in a standalone house. I tried living in an apartment and I hate it. Everything was squishy. We could hear the neighbors. It just was too much. I just want a yard where I can grow a garden and enjoy the outdoors with my dog. If there was an apartment that would give me that, then awesome. The noise alone was enough to make me want to go on a rampage, and the parking was a pain in the ass. Australians are very territorial in general and don't really like sharing space. We've just never really had to. I personally prefer apartment living. No lawns to mow, no gutters to clean, no exterior to paint, no gardens to weed. Way lower overall cost of living, yes, even including strata fees. I've done the analysis. My commute to work is 10-15 minutes maximum. Everything I need is within 2 or 3 blocks walk. More bars, restaurants, cafes than you can poke a stick at. The only thing I miss is having a shed. Yes. We don't want to live any closer to other people than we have to. We want to live on a block of land big enough that we don't have to see our neighbors. I love apartments, but I imagine, like many other Aussies, apartment living is never the end goal. I'd rather live in a house, personally. I will never again live in an apartment. I hated it. I personally don't mind the apartment lifestyle, but would I trade it for a small place with a garden? Sure, without a doubt the freedom and extra space would be massive. Australian apartments are poorly built, cheaply made, and lack any level of sophistication. Bizarre that a landmass the size of Australia tends to have overcrowded cities crammed full of high-rise ghettos. A lot do. Personally, I would hate to own a house, so much maintenance and living far from anything. I love apartments and the lifestyle. I wish Australia would build better ones that people want to live in rather than cheaply built investments. I grew up in high-rise public housing and our flat was big, well-insulated and well-constructed, not very pretty, but I still loved it. Most rental flats I've lived in as an adult are the exact opposite of that. I don't hate living in an apartment, but I wish they were built better. At least when you live in a shitty house, you've usually got more space and a backyard as compensation for it. I've lived in a few apartments, and I've always found that the biggest problem was that people don't feel a sense of belonging around their apartment, which is a direct result of so many renters and often being forced to move every few years, so you can't quite put down roots. In buildings where most residents own the property, everyone is friendlier, loud music is generally down to a minimum, and the places are cleaner. I previously lived in a high-rise and I barely knew the other residents. Now I live in a building with only 6 units and I recognize and am friendly with several of them. It takes quite a lot of social development for a culture to develop the rules and tolerances of high-density living. We don't have that. To me, it's almost as bad as the idea of prison. I wouldn't say Australians necessarily hate apartment living, it's just not something people would choose to live in long term. Most people here grew up in houses with a backyard and would prefer that if given the choice. My first time living in an apartment and I love it. I live so close to food, bars, and the beach. Everyone I know wants space, but I love it. I have a balcony to sit and KFC is 50 meters away. I've lived in apartments and the noise from neighbors can be awful. I ended up spending a lot of time outside my home to avoid this and I never felt truly comfortable in my space. In our own house, we can have massive vegetable gardens with fresh homegrown food, a private pool, outdoor seating and dining, space to have people visit and not be cooped up inside in lovely weather. Why would I go back to a showbox in the sky? We also play guitar and have regular jam sessions in our living room and home studio. Couldn't really do that in an apartment. Privacy, being outside as much as possible, having a dog, being surrounded by trees and plants. Apart from everything bad mentioned about living in apartments, there are also strata fees related to apartment living that can be quite costly. Most of the apartments are shitty built here, thin walls so you can hear people fart, sneeze, or FCK all the time. Shitty neighbors who blast music until 3 a.m., get wasted, and argue with themselves the whole night. Edit. Oh, I also forgot about pests. It's insane how many people are okay living with roaches. And because of them, me booking yearly treatments using mortine every month barely helps. Depends where you live and what kind of neighbors you have. The newer apartments are nice and peaceful. Currently living in an old apartment complex and have idiot neighbors who play loud music, invite a bunch of people over, talk loudly and sometimes even yelling till 2 a.m. during weekends, just inconsiderate losers. I'd rather kill myself than live in apartment again. Homeowner here, I hate apartments. Girlfriend used to live in one and the place was crawling with plebs.